I'm going to pick on our most famous of the minute, Councillor Williams.
Timer.
By the way, congratulations on your fantastic little piece in HP today. I don't know if you wrote that all or whether Linda wrote that for you, but good on you.
Chair.
So if you could lead us in a karakia, that'd be most welcome.
Ino tātou. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho, kia tau ai, te mauri tutu, te mauri ora, ki katoa, haumie, huie, tai kia.
Kia ora. Okay, so I'm going to do the apologies next. We have apologies from Councillors Lambert, Van Beek and Roadley. Have we heard from our Māori and Tawhenua reps, Peter and
Laura is here. She's just on her way, but I have not heard from Peter, sorry.
Okay, so
We'll just expect to see
tentatively
him.
record Peter as
All right.
an apology. Can I have a mover for the apologies, please?
Move, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Ormsby and Councillor McIntosh. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, housekeeping. So, just move on to the housekeeping. We are being live streamed as usual, recorded for viewing at a later date on the YouTube channel. In an earthquake, drop, cover and hold. Shaking is long and strong. When the shaking subsides, leave the building through the nearest exit to proceed immediately towards Napier Hill along Dalton Street to Tiffin Park. Continuing up the steps to Cameron Road, following people with long legs like Jock McIntosh. If the emergency alarm sounds, immediately evacuate the building through the nearest exit and the assembly area, which is over on my left on the grass, corner of Dalton and Vordia Streets. Emergency exits are clearly signposted. Wharepaku, located down the hallway outside the chamber entrance. Right, don't need a mover or a seconder for those. So we can move on to conflict of interest declarations. Do I have any today, please? No, thank you. So confirmation of minutes, 13th November. Do we have any issues with the minutes? I've got one. So while you're thinking about it, item 8, page 4, more stable Go Bay workforce has resulted in cancelled services and increased patronage. I think it's probably fewer cancelled services, so maybe just a fewer in there would be more accurate.
Thank you, Chair.
Item 8.
All right, yeah. Cool. Great. If there are no other changes, can I have a mover and a seconder? So Councillor Sears and thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Seconding that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, public forum. We have no public forum, so I'm going to welcome up the team to go straight into the financial report.
Morena. This is a presentation of the financial report for the Q2 ending in December 2024, and I'll hand over to Pam to run you through the report.
Yes, good morning. So predominantly these financials are showing quite a variance driven mainly by the silt task force and that silt and debris. So we parked that because it was not budgeted for. There's lots of little variances, but no big alarm bells going off. And this is in the profit and loss area. So we've got a list there of the small variances in lots of different areas. On a capital level, we're not spending capital as fast as we thought we would, which has impacted on our borrowings. So we'd borrowed money ready for work to begin. So we've got quite a lot of cash sitting there at the minute. Treasury, on a Treasury front, LGFA have stopped they used to charge you if you borrowed money outside their regular tenders. They've removed those fees. So it's giving us a lot more flexibility to borrow when we need it rather than earlier. Rates collection is going well. We have had more penalties this year, and collection is a little bit slower, but our team are making great inroads into that. So, the work is ticking along quite well. Other than that, open to questions. The detail is in that report.
All right. Councillor Ormsby.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. Thanks, team. Just your comment on capital not spent. In what area are we a bit slow behind in that?
It's very much the post-cyclone, the new works. I'm losing the acronyms, of course.
The MiWi work?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So it's our Category 2 areas we thought were about to build, but we're not.
Yeah, I think the initial process of getting the PDPs all signed off and that is longer than we had originally forecast. We had forecast the budget to be spent more in the second half of the year, but that's just going a little bit further into the second half of the year.
Thank you.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just the obvious question on the depreciation, the revaluation on the Stockbank assets. I'm just wondering, we knew the revaluation was coming, how we missed budgeting for that.
Essentially, the size of that revaluation was much larger than we had anticipated.
Yeah, when we set the LTP budget, it was before that revaluation had actually taken place. So because of the budget cycles, we have to set a budget for the following year before the current year is actually finished. So at the time of setting the budget, we were not aware of the revaluation there, and so that's why there is a difference to the budget.
Can I just follow up the question, Chair? I understand that, but we did know the revaluation was coming because we talked about it. So did we not make any allowance for, we didn't know what the figure would be, but we had a ballpark figure.
Yet not at the time of setting this budget within the LTP, it was following that so we couldn't actually change the budget in here. We've changed the management budget that we report on internally for here. It is one of the difficulties. That is why also in the balance sheet you'll see that the assets budget is quite significantly lower than the actuals, because we didn't have the figure for the revaluation at the time of setting the budget.
Understand that. Can I just go again, Chair?
Sure.
Are you saying that we cannot make an allowance on an estimation of a revaluation before it happens? Because we could have made an estimation of where we were going and made sure we had some budget for it, and that would have been altered when the revaluation came. Are you saying you cannot allow for it until the revaluation's done?
Yeah, for something that is that significant and that much of a change, when we're just estimating that that's the potential for there, we didn't have the final revaluations, it probably wasn't prudent to make that change at that point in time. At the moment, for the 25-26 annual plan, we are working through an estimated position of the balance sheet at the end of the 30th of June this year to give us our opening balances. That is going to be different to what we end up with at the 30th of June here. So it's 6 months before that we're actually making these assessments, and if we haven't got the actual valuation coming in from the valuers at that point in time, it is probably not as prudent to actually make that change.
Yes, I understand that. So we made no allowance. We made no allowance in that year.
We didn't make the
We made a
allowance
zero.
in the budget, no.
Okay, thank you.
Look, perhaps, Chris, just to round that out, what if we had, and I'll take it, your advice that it wasn't prudent to do so, would that have resulted in an increase in rating? So we would have had to second guess the increase and then rate for that estimate
Yes.
at that time. Yeah.
Yes.
So in fact, by not doing so, we've actually reduced the rates.
More prudent for ratepayers.
Yeah, but we will have to catch up later on. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite hard to follow outside of the budget with all the comings and goings of all this extra money. But you said there's no alarm bells. But at the end of the day, the operating surplus is 10 10 mil behind. And so when you read all the commentary, it's all quite positive, but it, you know, one of the things it says is some funding, subsidies and grants are behind budget, primarily due to the timing of the NIWI program. And then you go down further, and it says that while we're waiting for NIWI funds, and if we have to spend them, we have to, the cost of funds is a cost to us, and it could end up being $13 million at the end of all of this. So to me, that's a red flag, because that's $13 million I presume we haven't budgeted for, and we're going to end up, you know, on our balance sheet at the end of all of this. Is that correct?
Do you want me to answer?
Just looking for the 30 million. So in terms of the cost of paying for the Crown share of the NIWI expenditure, yes, at the moment, while we haven't received any grant money in from Crown Infrastructure Partners, up till March, when we're expecting our first payment, our cost of holding that, or of borrowing that money, will be about $400,000 at that point in time. We then expect to have to hold about $13 million for the next 2 or 3 years as a working capital amount, while we're spending money that Crown Infrastructure Partners will eventually reimburse us. All of that cost of the interest there is, at this stage, we have not had any confirmation from the government that they would cover the cost of all of that, and that would fall as a cost to the council to either be included or covered within our $44 million share of the overall program, or as an additional cost on top of that $44 million, which would then need to be funded by ratepayers.
Through you, Chair, if I can just add to that, we had a program steering committee meeting yesterday with CIP funding partners. The team are expecting to make the first application for reimbursement to the Crown next week. So we will be in a position next week to understand when that reimbursement process will start and to flow back in from here on in.
Okay, thank you. But Crystal, Susie, we also have, well, it's not an ideal situation, but we also have benefited through additional interest income over the last 2 years in holding funds for iwi and other related things.
And through you, Chair, that is why at the moment that is not showing up as a major variance of extra interest cost, because we have got through the HPRA funding and that interest income that is coming in.
Just to Councillor Foley's point about, which I'd interpret as a nervousness about large swings versus budget and needing to have a confidence that overall on track. My interpretation is that rates income is on track. We're slightly underspending day to day. The big movements we understand and have covered. So things like the silt and recovery, we're reliant on the organisation to be making sure that the net cost of that is nil, and we've taken assurances, including I think in this paper, around that. And we have put quite a lot of effort. The organisation's put a lot of effort, as have governance, into gaining confidence around those processes. So it's really just the success of the budget is the success of staff managing those big flows. And so far, for my own part, whilst I share Councillor Foley's nervousness, I think every time we've tested that as governance, and staff have gone out of their way, I think, to provide as much clarity as they can that those big movements are the risk, to explain to us the risk around the big movements and whether may be a cost to the organisation. So overall, nervous, but I think we're on track. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And look, I don't think we've met one of the presenters, or I haven't.
Sorry, I'm Pam Bicknell, I'm the Senior Group Accountant.
Sorry, Pam, I don't think I've met you. I just thought I'd better remedy that before I started asking you questions that really reveal my ignorance more than anything else about accounting and things, but it's on the topic we've just been discussing, and it's sort of paragraph 7 and paragraph 32, which is where I think you'll find the 13 million, Chris. So I read paragraph 7 and I wrote at the end of it, don't understand this. But what I think you've explained earlier, Pam, is perhaps an answer to it, that the timing of our borrowing doesn't necessarily need to align with the timing of the expenditure anymore to avoid penalties from LGFA. Is that's
Yes,
just a bit?
through the chair, yes, and there's some there's time lag between starting work and big invoices arriving in. So we're making sure we've got the cash to pay the invoice when it arrives, and next minute it's 3 weeks later or something like that. So there's a time lag. We had borrowed money in case.
And is that what you talk about, the liquidity
Yes.
strategy? You're not being penalised for being cautious in your borrowing to ensure you can pay your bills?
Yes, yeah, we have to hold a certain level of liquid assets, so in case a huge call on that comes. By holding a standby facility in that we haven't actually borrowed the money, we're only paying a few basis points to have the ability to borrow 10 million really, really quickly, like the next day. That allows us to have a liquidity position without actually having to hold that much cash.
Right, so how does that relate to paragraph 32 in terms of short-term borrowing to fund the portion of the NIWI cost before we get reimbursed? And I think you said it would cost $400,000 for a
So
4-month borrowing period.
yeah, so paragraph 32 is talking about the borrowing we've had to do for the costs that we have already incurred. Paragraph 7 is talking about the borrowing or having a standby facility for the anticipated costs about to happen.
Okay, two different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look, and maybe just to round out that conversation and address the question that I had, paragraph 31 notes that we pre-funded 8 million of debt maturing in April 2025. Now, on the face of things, that's quite a lot. That's quite early to be doing that. Is that also related to basically the slightly slow drawdown for NIWI? So that was possible. Is that a normal? Was that normal for you to borrow that much money that far ahead?
This 8 million is from previous, so there was I can't remember exactly when it was borrowed, but probably a few years ago. It's just one of the notes that is now coming due in our GFA as part of our credit strategy, and especially when our credit raters look at us, they like to see where you've got notes coming due or loans coming due in the next 6 months or so, that you've put aside cash to actually be able to straight away pay them, so that they know that you will not have an issue of being able to pay that note. So by pre-fund, so that was basically us saying we took the rate income that came in September, October last year, and said instead of putting that onto managed funds or onto deposit, we'll put 8 million of that onto a term deposit that matures on the day that loan becomes due, so we've got that money straight away there to pay that loan off.
All right, so not a loan, but a deposit earmarked for a loan, for the repayment of a loan. Thank you. Councillor Curtin, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. It just follows on from the previous questions. I just want to go to paragraph 28, 29 and just have a quick chat about our current outstanding accounts debt situation. Can you tell me, outstanding trade debtors, does that include consents as well? Or is that just trade?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does include.
Yeah, so trade debtors in our definition is everything other than our rate.
So you've got we've got two groups of payees.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're saying here that the aggregate of those trade debtors owing and how long is that 2.4149? And when you say outstanding, how outstanding is it?
At the moment, so I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but We're usually sitting at around about 700,000 that's over 90 days, and that's been steadily coming down over the years.
Okay, and for rates, you're looking at 3.6 for rates and 2.49 for other trade or trade. So 6 mil.
That's correct.
So that comes at a cost. How are you funding that shortfall in cash?
That comes through, like if we had collected all of that cash at this point in time, we would have $6 million less of borrowing on our, for working capital borrowing.
It's costing us quite a bit of money to.
It's, yes, but I think it would be very unusual to have no trade debtors.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
but,
sitting there.
nevertheless,
The level of the debt has come down significantly over the last 3 or 4 years. We've been making great inroads into it. I'm quite comfortable that the level of debt that's sitting there is very normal for an organisation this size.
And those naughty government agencies, tell me about them.
A lot of the government agency stuff it always relates around some of the grant funding and the sediment and debris, and a lot of the time it is awaiting a contract to be finalised and signed and things like that. We have no concerns about the collectability of those. It just sometimes the bureaucratic process of getting an invoice through the system and approved by the 400 people that need to approve it.
Have you met Nicola Willis, have you?
What was that?
Have you met Nicola Willis?
All of the government agency debt that has noted as being outstanding, due 30 or 60 days more, has always been cleared quite quickly after that. So we've never had any issue with that.
So in summary, we've got the 13 mil from NIWI that we're carrying, and then we've got on top of that, we're carrying our usual outstanding accounts.
I'll just not show that.
A lot of money, 30, 20 mil.
Questions for this might follow on through this.
Sorry. Okay. So back to Councillor Sears and
you.
then Councillor Foley.
I just think it would be useful to get clear on Will's point and on the NIWI funding. Our $44 million share, it's not in this paper, but we have budgeted for the $4 million worth of interest. I've seen that in one of the other papers, that our total share of that is going to be about 48 million, because there's 4 million going to be in interest debt over the 20 years. So I think these aren't surprising figures. These aren't figures we weren't expecting. We're seeing it here as an interest on the loan we're carrying, but we already knew that including our share and our holding is about 4 million, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we had accounted for the interest on our share of the payment, so us having to borrow that and not repaying that until rates had collected to pay for it. What we had not accounted for was us having to borrow to pay for all of the government's share and them not paying us for 6 months, and so we have to hold that debt until the government
Pays us. Okay, that's good to understand. So the green loan that we may get, we don't know when that will come, will the green loan be able to be used to hold government share as well as our own drawdown on the 44 million?
Yes, we're hoping that will be the case, so that'll reduce our interest cost by a couple of basis points.
Exactly. And as we spend, I've asked this before, we don't get to spend the 200 million first and then start to use our 44 at the end. It's 75-25 at every payment point, but in actual fact it's 100% us until the catch-up comes later. So when do we know, do we have an idea when the green loan may or may not be approved? Because that could be quite significant to us over these sort of figures.
No.
Still don't know.
Yeah, one of the management accountants is working closely with the LGFA and just going through it, but they are still considering it at the moment, so yeah, I don't have an updated or a firm date.
Thanks, it's useful to understand how that plays out.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Thanks, Chair. Just one other question. Pam, paragraph 25, the rates penalties, that 12,111 ratepayers, that seems quite a high proportion of the total ratepayer base. Can you give any further commentary on just what's going on there, what the feedback is, just what's happening there?
The only, through you, Chair, the only real feedback I can say is that it's fairly consistent with previous years. That's around about the level of ratepayers that don't pay their rates in full by that point in time. Compared to the last year, it's only 400 ratepayers more, which is not significant. No further analysis. Every year we have that level ratepayers that get a penalty issued. They then, as we go through the year, a reasonably consistent percentage of them keep paying each month, and get us down to, in the end, after when we're writing off after 7 years, it's still only a minimal amount of write-off, around $50,000 that then needs to be written off when you get to the statutory limit of someone not needing to pay their rate, or not needing to be accounted for their rates anymore. What I can do is have a talk to the rates team and see if there's any further stuff that we can add into the next report, just to give a little bit more context about the levels of penalties.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, another question?
Thank you. Look, I was kind of on the same topic that I forgot to ask before. So just from Councillor Foley's question, we've got about 70,000 ratepayers, right?
That's
Just trying to keep that in proportion. Yes, it is a reasonably big chunk. Public transport remissions, 99,000. And can you just remind me what the budget was for remissions across the different categories, including changes and public transport specifically, the $200 cap, etc.? Are we within budget there?
Yes, we put aside $1 million for remissions across all of the categories. And we're well within that budget, and that is what has allowed us to carry forward some of that into the next year to help offset some rates.
Okay, and then finally, I noticed we've spent $90,000 on land categorisation without legal fees, without spilling the precise nature of that. Can you give me a general sense of what that legal spend has been on? Paragraph 14, perhaps Nick might be able to answer that.
I can go away and check,
Come back to me if you
Chair,
like.
and come back to you, but likely relates to issues such as tangoio and legal advice that I've taken along the way in dealing with queries.
Thank you.
But I'll come back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Look, sorry. Yeah, Laura, you had a question. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora, thank you for your report today, and it's been interesting, the conversations happening around the table. My question is around, at our last strategic and corporate meeting, we had a breakdown of the NIWI program and the cost of activities, and it doesn't appear in this meeting. So if we go back to the November meeting, you had a blue box to break down the NIWI cost, and sorry I wasn't here to pass the minutes and I need to make some amendments there, sorry. I needed to understand, and we made a motion at the previous meeting about the breakdown of the consultation and the breakdown of who was consulted, as well as a reflection of that cost. I did ask at the previous meeting, and I was supported by the chair. So all I'm asking is, why haven't we got the breakdown in this meeting?
Yeah. In the last meeting, that was just a specific one-off to give an idea of the total cost of the NIWI program, where we had been sitting at that point in time. But as there haven't been a huge number of PDPs gone through, it's starting to ramp up. There's not a huge amount of change in there at the moment.
Okay.
And I think not sure where that gets, sort of the NIWI program will get reported through separately.
I think in terms of NIWI, whilst it's a large amount, is just another activity aligning with all the other activities that we do in the council. I think if we're wanting more detailed reporting on a specific activity, we will have to take that away to actually understand how much we do on the other activities as well. Sorry, Councillor Laura, I'm going to have to come back to you on why that's not in here, but specifically, yeah.
Thank you. And while it's a council activity, those sorts of consultation and engagement with our people is really important to our PGCs. So there would be a good vital breakdown for us around council partnerships and how you're spending the cyclone recovery money.
So Laura, if I picked up part of what you said was that there was a deficiency in the minutes.
Yes.
Well, what I'm going to do is ask you, we've already passed it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
I
ask you
know.
to work
Sorry.
with Leanne.
Yeah.
To just make, there is a mention of the issue that you raised in the existing minutes, but clearly you're not happy with that. So if you can work offline with
Yeah, thank you.
Leanne, we'll
Thank you,
try and
Sam.
get that sorted out. As for reporting of the NIWI, we have, from my point of view, there is regular reporting. It's not always at appropriate points where there is change. Sometimes it's through this committee and sometimes it's through council, regional council itself. I accept that standardisation would possibly be a better approach, so we'll take that away and have a look at it for next time. Look, we need to round out this, but given some of the questions today around rates collections and around debt collection, I wondered whether it would be valuable to just have a deep dive into that for next CNS. No tearing pressure, but just a paper that looks specifically at how we're collecting our rates, how we're following up, how we're collecting overdues both for rates and trade debtors, please. I think that would be useful. Yep. Without boiling the ocean, as Ian Maxwell would like to say. Thank you. Right, so if there are no other burning questions, we'll go to the recommendation. Do I have a mover that we receive and note the financial report? Thank you, Councillor Williams. And a seconder? Councillor Ormsby, all those in favour, or would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I'm just endorse the chair's suggestion of a more thorough look at some of that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's the timing of money in, money out, isn't it?
Correct. No, all right, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Chris. Right, so bit of a dilemma here. I'm conscious that we've got Lucy here from Reader, who's been patiently waiting, and I just wanted to test whether it's realistic to ask her to continue to wait for another 20 minutes as we wait for the organisational performance report, or whether it wouldn't be too disruptive to bring her forward. How does that affect staff, please?
It's fine if you bring it forward.
Yeah, okay, all right. So we'll go with Reader and Lucy, thank you.
Oh, yes, we have a meeting, Lucy.
Do a quick intro. Yep, so it's item 7.
Through you, Chair, just to welcome Lucy to Corporate and Strategic on your behalf. Reader, as you know, has over the last 3 years gone from being not existing to getting its work underway, and this council, along with 4 other councils in the region, has provided funding over that period. Reader has reported through to Matariki, and Matariki papers, which are distributed to councillors, I understand, have contained regular updates from Reader and reports on the work they've done, most recently a key economic analysis for the region. At the same time, Lucy and Alistair, as the chair, have regularly attended Corporate and Strategic to update this council as a shareholder on a regular basis, and this is the next in those series. You also have a workshop this afternoon to consider the draft letter of expectations for reader for the next 18 months. So that'll be a separate process that we'll do this afternoon.
Thank you.
Well done, councillor.
Welcome, Lucy. You've got a
you very much.
presentation for us, I believe.
Yes, if you would like. Thank you, Chair, and hello, councillors, and I know it's a bit late, but Happy New Year. Because, yeah, really nice to be back. And I just want to offer Alistair's apologies too. It was a little short notice for us and none of our directors could make it today, unfortunately. But they did, Alistair in particular, passed on his regards and hope that you've all started the year well. I just thought I'd just start with just our update. We only saw you in November. But since November, we've published the research and also our annual report and had our shareholders meeting. And I know that Amberley should have, did you get all in your cubbies, the annual report and the research? Great. So I'm happy if you want to start off with any questions or comments that you might have around the letter of expectation or the process that we're going through at the moment. I know that you have a session this afternoon to talk about it. But the idea is now that we're getting into the swing of our governance processes and that we have a draft letter of expectation out to all shareholders, not just the councils. And the idea is that you're all putting your feedback into that. It will be collated by the Matariki Strategic Advisor, Kare Wiki, on behalf of the co-chairs. And then that will be presented to us, I believe, by Friday, which is quite a tight turnaround. And I hope that next time around there'd be a little bit more lead-in, but it's just the process getting underway, I guess. From there, we'll receive that letter of expectations, and then we will work through a workshop with our board and work over the next couple of months to come back with a statement of intent, and that will then form our budget and our work plan for the next 18 months. So whereas last year was a little bit of a scramble to even set the whole process up, but we ended up with the letter of expectations. We didn't have a statement of intent. We've now, through the last shareholders meeting, we passed a resolution that would say that we now have a statement of intent that we come back with that lays out the work program. So I hope that's all kind of clear now. We're trying to get into a rhythm in the same way that you would with HBRIC or any other council organisation or council-controlled organisation where you have a letter, statement of intent, and then regular reporting throughout the year. And while we report to Matariki primarily as our shareholder representative, those reports will always come to you, and then we can be here whenever you want us to be here to update you. That's the idea, really.
Thank you, Lucy. Look, so I've got a question from Councillor Ormsby. What I'll first say, and I think you have got a formal presentation to lead us through, which would be great. I think the most challenging thing for this council at the moment is that we're going through, as every council, an annual plan process. In the ordinary course, we'd expect a budget from you that would set out what you're going to do and what our part, and we would deliberate on what our part of funding that is. You've adequately explained effectively how we don't have a budget, right? So we're in this situation where, because your shareholders have not set the bounds of your activities, you cannot put a budget together. That's
right.
Fair?
Yeah. So obviously we have a budget that goes through till our balance date June 30.
Yep.
So we're working within the bounds of the last letter of expectation, although it technically expired in December. So we still have a budget and we're working like a normal organisation. But I guess like with, I'm not quite sure what your process would be like with HBRIC, for example, but I'm assuming they're the same thing, that they get the letter, then they form their work program, and then they're able to develop their budget and talk to that. So it's chicken and egg. The letter comes first, then we present back.
Yep.
It's really you.
Not quite such a confronting situation with HBRIC.
Yeah,
It's part of the family, if you like.
Yes. So we're also a part of your family, councillor, chair. But and I guess that is a
percentage. Yes.
Yeah, a percentage of, and that's the what it's saying. Councillor Williams's article today is at 56 councillors, and then on top of that we've got the PSGE boards and the Chamber of Commerce and the Māori Business Network. So I think I roughly it's about 100 different councillors and governors that we've got within our family of shareholders. And so trying to have a really agnostic process that everyone contributes to and that works with everyone's timing, it's tricky. but by just trying to be really structured about it and having very clear pathways for communication through Matariki, we're hoping to solve that.
Right, thank you. And yeah, we have a workshop this afternoon, leading straight on after that, looking at both of our annual plan and specifically the letter of expectations.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Oars, we had a question.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, through you. Just really commend your work, Lucy, in finding your feet with the board in terms of where readers going forward. I think just to remind everyone that Matariki is our only collective group across the region with our PSGs and Ngāti Kahungunu iwi, who are also shareholders within Reader. So it is our way to stay together, given that economic development is our real focus area. So just coming to some of your projects, the understanding the Hawke's Bay economy research, which we have in our paper, is really, was at that workshop at Matariki, and that gives us a great stepping stone to prioritise where we want to go forward in terms of projects that we focus on. I recall at the AGM that there was a surplus of $1 million sitting in Reader. Can you just describe to us what has been done with that 1 million surplus since that was recorded? And actually, if you look forward for Reader's work, because obviously we have to keep this in mind when we make our annual plan decisions, how you see those values best used going forward in the next 18 months.
Through you, Chair. So, yeah, it was a carry forward. So the surplus was the carry forward so we've been funded for 3 years now. We're just come up to our last 6 months tranche of funding. So in the first, it took a good 18 months to get Reader off the ground. So we hold a carry forward. It's going to be allocated to projects. So I haven't spent it since the shareholders meeting, but we've got a couple of projects lined up that we know coming out of the research thought to be valuable. So two that I mentioned in the paper, the Food East business case and the review of tourism in Hawke's Bay. And then the rest of that money will be allocated towards projects as we develop our work program after receiving the the letter of expectation. So the presentation that I've got, and I really just wanted to check that you did want to receive it if you've got time to go through it, because it's really just a presentation of the research into the economy. Yes. And this is a foundational piece for us to say, like, we wanted to, and we've talked about this with you before, we wanted just to have a really good ground level understanding of what the economy looks like, what are our key challenges, opportunities. A lot of the findings that we've already talked about them at high level with you are no surprise. Like, we really believe productivity is the number one issue in the economy, and that's being driven by a number of things, and we can go into in the presentation, which we then want to be really clear about. What are the things that we as Reader and then we as the region can address? What are the levers have we got to address them, and what are the next best steps on those? So do you want me to jump into the presentation?
Everyone has had a chance to see this previously, so what would be most valuable in running through it quickly is to talk more about what the future looks like, what the future activity of reading looks like, based on the boilerplate, this the scene setting work that's being done.
Yeah. Well, how do I get that up?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Was it questions, Chair, or what was?
On the presentation.
Chair, I was hoping we could see the presentation then ask the questions in case some of them are answered.
We started having questions.
Yeah, we had a question, so I didn't pick up that you had a particular question while we're getting...
Yeah, sorry, I was just setting the scene around the...
Are you joining?
Councillor Curtin, if you've got a question before the presentation.
Well, are you looking at your annual report? Is that part of your presentation?
No.
No? Okay. Would you mind if I ask a couple of questions on your annual report? Yeah. If I can take, have you got your annual report there at all?
No, I remember it quite well.
Okay. You know it? Okay.
Yeah.
I just want clarity around what's included in this, because the revenue looks like it's an aggregate of 3 years' worth or 2 years' worth, and are there expenses in aggregate of all of the expenditures relating to both Matariki and Reader? Are they?
Yes, through your Chair. So, and just remember the balance date. So this is back from July last year.
Well, that's where I'm trying to resolve.
Yeah.
The accounts state they are for the year to date. In effect, they are, well, their revenue at least reflects 2 years to date.
Yeah, that's
Would
right.
be
So
fair.
we tried to wrap up, and this is where the start of this process for Rita was a little bit messy. So the
But
funding.
have you carried forward
We've-
all the expenditure and the revenue that was related to both Matariki and Rita?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So in terms of Matariki, in our third year of funding, the funding was raised. So the first year was 1.5, then it was 1.56.
Yes.
Then 1.7.
Yeah.
That extra couple of 100,000 was meant to
Outside
be
revenue.
for Matariki
Okay.
expenditure, but it was never actually ring fenced. It was within our funding pot.
Yes.
So I don't ring fence it separately.
No,
Yeah,
I'm not
okay.
so focused on that. What I'm asking is, have we collected all of the expenses relating to both Matariki and Rita in this set of accounts?
Yes, up until June 30 last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from the get-go, up until June 30,
Yeah.
that's the expenditure?
Yeah.
So if I look, for example, I'm just going to page 22 of your report, the board member remuneration, 178,567, does that represent all the fees paid to Rita and Matariki board members over that time?
So, through your chair, Matariki board members aren't paid anything. The Rita board members started, they
So
were appointed
Matariki didn't have any expenditure?
December 2023.
Matariki didn't have any expenditure?
No.
So that represents 178,567 is the number paid to Rita board members over that period of time.
That's
Is
right,
that
since December 2023 when they were appointed.
Sure, okay.
I was appointed in August 2020,
Okay, that's fine.
22 it was
I
actually.
see in
Yeah,
your
sorry,
notes-
August 2023.
I see in your notes at page 10 that the Matariki board has got a strategic advisor.
Yes.
Why is that? I thought you were the strategic advisor to Matariki.
No, so the strategic advisor to Matariki supports the co-chairs in the overall Matariki program of work. So she runs the secretariat. There's a board secretary, and Kariwiki is her name, the strategic advisor. So, for example, she is the link between our organisation and the co-chairs when we're dealing with things like letters of expectation.
Okay.
We're an advisor only on the economic development piece.
Okay, so they need a particular strategic advisor as well.
Well, it's because they've got a whole a work program of their own as Matariki in its own right, and they're responsible for governing two bodies within that, what they call now regional architecture, the Recovery Agency and Rita.
Okay.
It's much easier to whiteboard up sometimes, but I
Sure.
don't know if that's possible.
And could indulge me just a little
Yeah.
on
We're
your
allowed to
annual
whiteboard on
report.
councils?
I'm looking at page 10, and all the wonderful work that is, looks like it's being carried out. You've got that wonderful document, Hawkesbury Economy, that's product of the work to date of both Matariki and Rita. Then you've got telecom resilience, you've got Rita decarbonisation project, you've got state highway investigation, you've got Cyclone Gabriel recovery, and now I see you're doing Food East and you're doing tourism. Do you appreciate that we've got a lot of activity in those areas already? For example, tourism, we've got a whole experts in the field just doing that. Food East, for example, we've scouted high and low to get the relevant experts involved. We've got a regional transport committee chaired by my colleague, Councillor Williams. We've got a regional lifelines group that looks at telecom resilience. Why would you folk be doing that as well?
Through you, Chair. So we have written into our operating principles, decision-making criteria in our charter, we only get involved in, we've got a number of principles that we follow. We don't do anything that any other organisation is doing. We don't replicate any other activity. So if we use the telecoms communication resilience part, for example, there was a gap in understanding around what happened in the breakdown of telecommunications. So before we launch into any piece of work, we talk with the Lifelines Committee, the Recovery Agency, telecoms providers and others to see, is there a gap? There was clearly a gap identified. This was back right after I started. And so we brought in consultant, Jonathan Brewer, who came, the other gap also was in the GIS mapping. So I'll just give you an example.
Sure, I get that.
And so the advice that they provided was not being provided anywhere else. And then our role is to provide that to the relevant agencies who then have the follow-up steps.
That's the naive question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Curtin. I think you've made your point.
No, I haven't.
Clear-
I
Yes,
haven't.
you've made your
I
point
wanted to make
clearly.
this other point, that why would we not ask those agencies to fill that gap in knowledge?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think I understand it's a valid question, but many agencies are not set up to be able to do it. They don't have the ability to bring in research or to have the funding to do that piece of work. And we've found that time and time again, and it's sometimes quite surprising. I just would like to also say that we only, and you didn't mention Turai, the business hub, that took a lot of work to get up off the ground. We only opened it a year ago today. And so that really slowed us down. And we only really started our work program in about April, May last year. So we've been working flat out to try to get ourselves in a position where we can be clear about what our role is. And I think we probably, Chair Hinawai, talk about that as I get towards the end of the presentation about where we now see the fit for reader actually adding some value, so that we don't replicate. We're not a regulatory agency. We're not trying to do someone else's role. We're trying to be that critical voice, the provider of research, the connector, the facilitator of conversations, the bringing together. There's a lot of siloed thinking, and we want to see across the top of that on a range of issues that affect our economy. And there is a clear need for this type of role. I think that's why we were set up in the first place. But now that we're starting to build our networks and knowledge and understanding, the areas that we can add value in are popping up all over the place. And we've just got to be really careful about how we prioritise them and what our role in it is.
Thank you, Laura. Can we move on to your presentation,
Yeah.
please?
So some of this might be repetition for you. Do I click a... Oh, okay. So just to remind you, so we did an RFP and we got a joint proposal in from Infometrics and Martin Jenkins, which is a really good combination because Infometrics is very strong on the data side of things, and Martin Jenkins does really good sector and industry engagement. So the study is not the answer to everything. It's really just a ground level foundational piece of research. But 4 main documents came out of it. We had the Infometrics 5-year review of the economy, the past 5 years. Then they did a employment forecast, and then we had the Martin Jenkins report and the sector analysis. And although the sector analysis says September, it actually was just published in December. So the aims were just to provide insights into the economy. Yeah, there we go. We'll go to the process. So,
Sorry.
okay. We'll go to the process. Yeah, there we go. We did a review of the economic performance and trends, and then this detailed industry and sector analysis. That there's a methodology that's used to go through in a lot of depth. I actually think this is my favourite document out of all of it. This is a really good, insightful piece of work that shows what's actually going on in the economy and where the potential growth areas are. And that's based on a whole number of different factors, which you can read about in all of these little graphs. But that gives us a really solid idea of what's actually happening now in terms of our where our most productive sectors are and what the future may look like. Then, of course, there was a research review. We captured everything that has ever been published in Hawke's Bay. And I'm, by the way, going to be putting as much of that as I can on our website. We've got our current research, but I'm going to have a section that captures all of documentation like that, which I think will be helpful. And then we did a whole range of interviews, so about 70 with businesses, PSGs and so on. And these are really pretty in-depth interviews of up to an hour or more in a couple of workshops. So, Damaris assistant. So I don't want to spend too much time because we have presented this research earlier, but it's just to give that broad context view that obviously globally, nationally, we're in strange times, aren't we? COVID lockdowns, the shift to working from home, supply chain disruptions all over. And despite all of that, if we go to the next slide, Hawke's Bay's actually had been doing quite well up until the cyclone. I've just got a couple of slides here that just also provide context around what each of our TLA regions, areas looks like. So in terms of population growth, we actually have, and I think we've all heard that anecdotally, the number of people moving into Central Hawke's Bay that are working in Hastings and Napier and sometimes in Central Hawke's Bay, but clearly leading out there in population growth. Yep. And in economic growth, we talked about this last time I was here, that professional services are the largest contributor to growth. So we've got the fastest growth in the region, which everyone is quite surprised around, in the professional, scientific and technical services. But when you start going out and interviewing businesses, it's no surprise, because there's actually a lot of those hidden gems that you hear about anecdotally are alive and well in Hawke's Bay, and there's some really smart thinking going on. Quite often in the advanced manufacturing space aligned to the Hort and primary sector industries, which is no surprise. So this is obviously the other reports that show you what the contribution has been in the past, but this is what the projections are looking like around their industry and sector analysis, that we're going to have more growth in that professional, scientific and technical services, and also a large growth in the healthcare and social assistance side of things, which is your rest homes and other types of healthcare. Construction was projected to sort of fall off a cliff, really, after an incredibly strong growth in Hawke's Bay over the last 5 years. And then we've got retail, trade and manufacturing falling behind. So in terms of productivity, and I know we had a good discussion around this last time, our productivity challenge in Hawke's Bay is that, or there are many, but we have a smaller proportion of working age population compared to the nation. So we've got proportionately older and proportionately younger population, and that working age population that's available to work. We've got some real difficulties around that because of our high Māori and Pacifica, Māori particularly population here, and challenges around health that reduce time in the workforce. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But our output per worker is lower across pretty much every sector compared to the rest of the country. So even in horticulture, where we're leaders, our productivity per worker is lower than in other regions that are strong in horticulture. And that's been, their productivity in the hort sector has been growing rapidly, and you can see that in the sector analysis, but we're still quite far behind. And we're lagging the national average. We'll go into that a bit more later. So I would already probably whipped through that. So in terms of the analysis, these are the sectors that ranked highly, and according to the analysis, based on those parameters, will continue to be important. So that's the major primary industry, so no surprise there. Forestry, wood processing, hort, meat and meat processing, food and beverage, machinery and equipment manufacturing and construction, even despite the projected downturn in construction. And the industries with potential that could be more important in the future are the four below. And I know that tourism came up quite a lot in the media around that time, but we released this saying not that it's not of value, but it does have enormous potential if certain things are done to help develop that industry. So themes that came through, and I shared some of these back in November with you, is that just how interlinked our food and fibre capabilities are in Hawke's Bay, so no surprise there, but that if we want to grow the economy or see evidence that we are moving towards a more productive economy, we would be wanting to see more of the types of technology companies, research, science, technology, advanced manufacturing, automation, mechatronics, all of those types of things which are now happening and linked very much around our food and fibre capability. Family connections came constantly up with everyone that we talked to around the why they were in Hawke's Bay. There are exceptions always, and some of you around the table who have come from out of the Bay will be part of those exceptions. But almost everyone we've talked to is in Hawke's Bay as a business owner because they either grew up here, married someone from here, or had some connection in the past. There's very few people that come out of the blue and set up business in Hawke's Bay. And we think that there's something in that needs to be explored and exploited somehow, something to work through. But it's something that our researchers who have worked all over the country said that was really striking in Hawke's Bay and different from other regions. And it also, it's just something to keep in mind when a lot of people think the role of economic development agencies is to go out and attract businesses to communities. That's not at all what we think our role is. But starting to get some understanding of why businesses come here helps to, I guess, nuance that thinking a bit. And innovation and technology came through as really common themes, even in the more sort of traditional sectors, the meat processing and so on. There's an enormous amount of investment that's been going on in the last few years around automation, robotics, better technology, which is really encouraging. There are a number of cross-cutting challenges, we call them, that affect all industries. So the number one issue really would be skills and talent, and that came up time and time again. We often see the economy as almost two-tier in that you've got the horticulture, meat processing type environments, which are generally thought of as low-skilled, but they're not really low-skilled roles anymore, that really struggle to get local labour and have been relying on bringing in foreign labour. And then you've got the other side of it, which is this advanced manufacturing type space, which are looking for really highly skilled, like automation engineers and mechanical engineers and so on, that we're not able to fill with our local labour market currently. So there's quite a demand for these types of engineers and higher qualified people in the region, but we're mostly pulling them in from outside. And we're in this situation in that with a population of across Hawke's Bay of 180,000 or so, we've got EIT as our main provider, our Polytech, and we've got a really, I guess, at a deeper level, we've got problems right from our NCEA level at high school, which our attainment rates are dropping. So we've got dropping attainment rates. We've got a Polytech that's been, I guess, under restructure for the last however long, and still will be up for the next couple of years as the government figures out what they want to do with Te Pukenga and whether or not we get our own standalone EIT. We've got a Tertiary Education Commission that's in a bit of, again, they're a little bit all over the place. We've got workforce development councils that are currently in the process of being disestablished and re-established. So that whole skills and trading space is really quite messy at the moment. And we think that there's some opportunities there, which I'll get to later. Transport and connectivity was right at the top of the list for our businesses too. And that connectivity includes that mobile connectivity, internet, and our main freight distribution networks, so roading, rail, sea. Energy and water, no surprises to you, although quite disparity across the region, obviously, and we want to try to always remember that some of these broad challenges are felt more strongly in some parts. Wairoa's water situation is obviously very different than Central Hawke's Bay. And then business and industry development, that's really just capturing a whole bunch of themes around challenges. A lot of our businesses do their thing, and they often will have a client that's only in the USA, and they do their thing in Hawke's Bay despite all the odds with all the skills challenges and transport and everything. They engage with that client and they don't really have anything else to do with anyone else around them. And we've seen that time and time again. There's organisations like Export New Zealand, Business Central, the Chamber, that do their best to bring people together, but there's not a huge amount of, there's not a lot of opportunities actually for business to come together and really support each other in a very structured way, other than meeting each other at the Koru Lounge once in a while as they're passing ships through the night. So in terms of opportunities, they are around, no doubt, no surprise, responding to those challenges. There's the kind of cross-cutting opportunities like around road resilience, and that's why we kicked off already that piece of work around State Highway 2. And Councillor Curtin, you asked, for example, why would we do that? And our first Port of call, as always, we went to the Regional Transport Committee. I spoke to Councillor Williams, spoke to the team.
Yeah. I was going to mention that.
Spoke to the local MPs. Obviously, Katie Nimmon's very passionate about transport. I spoke to all of the PSGE, iwi groups. I spoke to all of the councils, and then a whole number, like a large number of big road users, from Rocket Lab to AFCO to all the transport companies, and NZTA, of course, who quietly, the relationship manager was quietly saying, yes, please do this piece of work, because if you left this piece of work to NZTA, and Councillor Williams knows much more about this than me, they have a very reductionist set of parameters about how they set priorities on roads. And so in order to break through that, you have to build a political case, really, to build a strong enough economic case that you can use that for political advocacy. So that's kind of where we're coming from. We want to build the economic case on behalf of all of these users, who would be the ones that then take that forward in terms of advocacy. The skills program, we think there's a piece of work to be done around that. Actually, I'll get into the next slide in a bit more detail, but there's some low-hanging industry opportunities around Food East, destination marketing, and some targeting networking for manufacturers. But I'll just jump into these, and I won't go into a huge amount of detail, and you can see them in your report, but all of these, normally, if we weren't on such a tight time frame to try to produce this research and start getting recommendations moving, you'd spend another 6 months really deep diving into these and working with industry to find out, how much appetite there is for industry to support all of these initiatives and councils and so on. As it is, we've got a number of high-level recommendations, and it's really up to us and others that these affect to work through those at a more detailed level now, to say which ones do we want to support, how are we going to do it, and what is the role that we play. And one thing that I'm going to start doing when I present to councils and Matariki too is to be really clear that when we do a piece of work, what's the practical application of that work, what's our role in it, and what's the next step, the kind of hand-on of that work. So, for example, Food East, if I just look at the first one, so Food East is up and running, it's had $18 million spent on it, it's got these lovely facilities. They don't have working capital at the moment really to explore some of the areas that would kickstart their practical uses of Food Innovation Hub. So there's lots and lots of ideas floating around, but until they actually get some industry partners on board that are located at Food East and working alongside, Food East staff and other businesses that are in the area, Food East's, promise is not going to be met. So when READER was set up, it was specifically mentioned that READER would be supporting the development of Food East. So I've always thought that was at the back of the mind of people setting up READER. So one of the things that we can do is come in and say, well, based on the research that we did and based on the work that Food East has already done to date, there seems to be a gap in the market, for example, around fermentation and developing a capability around fermentation. Food East has submitted a proposal to the Regional Investment Fund around that, but they don't have a business case that sits under it that would provide sufficient evidence to the government to invest in the technology that's required. So we would come in and fill a gap, as long as both of our boards agree. We're looking at the proposal at the moment that would say, right, we're going to do a one-off piece of work with Martin Jenkins to come in and look specifically at whether we can find a commercial business case for fermentation capability at Food East. So that will be a wide span of the situation in New Zealand, what businesses are interested in, is there a commercial case for an industry partnership to co-invest in the equipment, et cetera, et cetera. That requires a particular set of skills, knowledge and funding to be able to do it. So we come in from the side, support and partnership, do that piece of work. It's not up for us to then implement it. That's Food East's job. So we're a connector, a facilitator, provider of research. That's how we see the role in like that. Anyone have any questions about that?
I've got some questions generally, Chair, but not just about
unless they're specific to this one.
Yeah.
We'll do it at the end. Very specific.
I'm just asking about the grapes there and looking at a fermentation facility, would that spill out to being able to process grapeseed oil?
I'm not sure. Sorry, through your chair. I'm not sure about the connection between grapeseed oil and fermentation, but I'm sure they'll explore it.
Oh, it's just.
Is there a connection?
There is a connection. Sam might be able to fill you in on that, but there is a high demand for grapeseed oil given the price of olive oil.
Oh, yeah. So those are the types of things that would be explored in this case.
I think so.
So there's obviously there's a whole range of things in there. Probably can flick through to the next one. So my job now and my board is to be looking at scanning those opportunities and looking across, these, we look at these factors here, I guess. So, is it valid? What's the potential impact? How practical is the initiative? How is it of regional significance, and are there opportunities to leverage investment? So kind of scan across those things, and also the operating principles that we've got embedded into our charter, and come up with really a short list of what we think is going to have the most bang for the buck over the next 18 months in response to our letter of expectation. And then we work through, like you would in any organisation, so this is what I'm going through at the moment, scoping up a number of initiatives around those areas to think, to set a work program for the year. So we obviously won't be able to do all of those things, but even with the carry forward funding that we've got right now, we would chunk that out into projects, and that's generally, in most cases, going to be hiring a specialist team, whether that's a consulting company or a team. I don't have a team of people at all at the moment. It's just me and my board, and I've got 2 people that look after Te Rai, because I've always wanted to keep the money free so that we can actually spend it on projects rather than on overheads. I think at some point I'm going to need to get a couple of staff because it's a little bit stretchy. But that's the way we work it out. So just the next step. So really from here, waiting for our letter of expectations, I've got a workshop in March with my board where I'll be presenting to them my proposed plan of what I think we should do over the next 18 months. We'll be chewing over the priorities, which one's first, whether they think it's important or not, and then we'll work through in depth what those might look like, budget them out, work out our partnerships and so on. We will then come back with a statement of intent at the next Matariki meeting in April, which I'm sure will be passed on to you, and the budget and work plan is finalised for July 1st, and then we get on with it and report back through our reporting cycle. That's it.
Thank you, Lucy. I've got time for a couple of really quick questions. Councillor Williams.
Yep. Does Councillor McIntosh want to go first? I'm happy. I'll fire. I think this is right at the nub of it, to be honest. You filled a real void for me in understanding the why you were doing this research. The key concern for me is that the structure we've got opportunity to input, forgive the context, into the letter of expectations. But what I wasn't seeing in the draft we've got in front of us is a linkage between the baseline studies you're doing on our economy and where the barriers to productivity are and where the opportunities are, because to me it's all about productivity. That's New Zealand's biggest economic challenge, and some of the inequities within the economy. If you go back to your goals, it's productivity, distribution of benefits and resilience, right? So I guess I'm just interested in your reflection. If you've seen the draft letter of expectations or not, I can't draw a link between that, the research you've done, and the goals of READER. Do you think they should be, we should be focusing READER on taking that work forward to really boost productivity in the region based on the research that's already been done?
Yeah, I've seen the initial draft and then the draft that came out, and our board's also been invited to make some comment on this draft, so I've got track changes all through it at the moment too. Might be quite a lot for them to wrangle together in the next couple of days, but I think there was 2 schools of thought. When we spoke about it at the shareholders AGM, the idea was that basically the shareholders would come back to us and say, take that report, work through it and implement the priorities. And I think that's what the first draft that I saw of the letter of expectation said, and then the next one just dialed it back up a level to make it more high level. So I would be very comfortable by being as specific as you want in the letter of expectations around that. But I can say also rest assured that that's exactly what we will be saying in our statement of intent. we'll come back and say, thank you for your input. This is how we're going to outwork it, and we'd be basing it off this foundational work that we've got here.
The word productivity is not in there. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh, and then we've just got time for Councillor Foley.
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to say, it is really important stuff. This, I think, it does warrant a bit of time. And some of these things really smack you between the eyes, and I don't think we appreciate it enough. So this was really helpful, thanks, the Jenkins report. Can we just go to slide 8? I think it is the one on the productivity challenge.
Yeah.
And so, could you bring that up, Lizzie?
Yeah, sorry.
And so on that, it notes that New Zealand productivity 72,000, Hawke's Bay 55. So we're bad. But am I right? That number for Australia is a bit over 100. Yeah,
I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry. But
I just Googled it myself. So if you want to know, and there's a strong, I'm right, aren't I, that there is a strong correlation between this and incomes.
Yes, yeah.
So if we want to know why people are going to Australia, even from this place, which we think is fantastic, there's your answer. You know, we're 55 and Australia is somewhere north of 100. So my question was that.
Well, there's a strong correlation between low productivity industries and which pay low salaries as well. So the in general, and it's not always the case, the industries that have higher qualified staff in them and that are paying them better are more likely to be highly productive because they are more likely to be in more advanced industries.
Yeah, I think at the most basic level though, we're 55. Australia actually I think is north of 100. So you know that's a very big thing that's hitting us between the eyes. Can you go to slide 11, Desi? On sectors that rank highly there, so that all makes sense to me except for construction services, and you've explained that. On the industries with potential, I think if we're to be enduringly good at that stuff, then we need to have a competitive advantage in it. And for several of those, I mean, IT and digital, tourism, and in particular, I think most regions would probably say those are areas of potential for them. And to some extent, screen and creative, I don't know why we would be pushing so hard in that. I know it's happening out at Homoana and so on, but you know, Wellington does that pretty well. Otago does that pretty well. So that seems quite a hard patch to me. Sorry, not a question, a statement.
Yeah, that was a little controversial, the inclusion of screen and creative, but it was more around potential from a starting point of pretty low.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then on slide 13, please, challenges. I think isn't our, you know, I agree with those, but isn't our big challenge capital?
Yeah.
Capital to do this stuff?
That was really interesting, and that, again, that's something that we need to look into further. But our findings, we could probably broadly make the statement that there is actually enough capital in Hawke's Bay, but it is not. There's a range of issues. So we've got capital here. Anyone that talks to that's in the investment industry, there's a lot of wealth sitting in Hawke's Bay, but it's conservative capital. It's come out of the primary sector, and and there's a wariness or a conservatism that prohibits or inhibits people from investing in more productive industries, which is the kind of the tech side of things, just because of lack of knowledge. There's been efforts over the years, and many of you have probably been involved with them, around setting up angel investment networks and so on. And the feedback that we've had is that there's a lack of a pipeline of investable deals in Hawke's Bay. So while the capital's there's not the investable deals, and like that pipeline match is not being made.
Okay.
So there's something in that. Tom could probably speak more about that, but I think there is something that could and should be done in Hawke's Bay around that, but it's not a quick fix.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Chair, that's good.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate the time. And thanks, Lucy. Following on from Councillor Curtin's questions, I think your presentation has done a good job at explaining some of the why. Nonetheless, it'd be really good to know more about the processes around how you make the decisions on where you invest. And you said you met with Martin as Regional Transport Chair. I just wonder if you met with the Regional Council to discuss feedback around investment. And the reason I ask is because a lot of the areas you're looking at is around food production and sort of, new areas and new technology. But at the end of the day, it all relies on water as well as the existing food production system structure in Hawke's Bay. And there just seems to be a real lack of regional water kind of security strategy around all of this. And so there's lots of different things going on by different people in different places, but there's no collaboration. And so if we don't get this right, and then the regulation is always threatening to reduce the amount of water, all of this could be for nothing.
Yeah, absolutely right. Through you, Chair. I think what's missing for us as Hawke's Bay, and what makes my job a little bit more difficult in helping our board to set priorities, is that in a perfect world we'd have a regional strategy that says, even if it's a highfalutin one, that says we want to grow productivity by X percent, we'd like to grow our share of GDP from 3% to 5%, or we want to have a healthier, happier population, let's say. Let's say we had a big couple of goals that we wanted. Then you can start to work down through those. Okay, well, what does success look like? What's our measurement point now? And I think in the draft letter of expectations from Matariki, there is a section in there that talks about a refresh of the Matariki Regional Economic Development Strategy. The last strategy was an enormous, it was a great effort. Everyone got around the table, they developed it, there was some coherence around it, some support, but it was a really large list of tactics. And so I guess what's missing for us as a region is that big picture view of what do we want the economy to actually look like. And I think what we heard, this piece of research has just said, it's identified the problems really well, and it said, hey, we've got these issues that need to be addressed. But in terms of choosing which are the most important things to address, who's on board, what levers have we actually got to put, that's where, for a reader, it's like we have to do that. We have to try to find a way to set those priorities. We have a set of priorities in our charter which says what we should and shouldn't do, but you've got to weigh up the whole time, like how much effort do we put around transport and connectivity versus skills and talent in the absence of a really clear regional strategy or direction around what good looks like for Hawke's Bay. And I know it could sound a little naive, but there are regions around the world and even in New Zealand that have a really firm statement about who they are and what they want to be and what success looks like. And I think some of those key indicators, like for us, if we look down the track, we're nervous about water. We should be very nervous about our skills and talent, because we've got a population of young kids that are coming out of high school that are not equipped for life don't even have NCEA level 2, that are feeding into gangs or into other pathways, that if we don't address that now and take it really seriously now, we're going to be looking not too flash in the next 20 years. But I guess Matariki is that regional forum to have those conversations, but it needs to be all the constituent parts, all of the councils, the PSGs, the other community organisations need to be brought into that somehow. So, I'm not answering your question very well, other than to say that it's really quite tricky, and we have to sort of make best endeavours to figure out what we think is going to have the most impact. And also, the other thing that I've learned in my last 18 months is to try to go where the energy is. There's so much going on in this region right now. People are so stretched. Councillors have got such enormous responsibilities, and trying to find those 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 projects that you can actually get buy-in and people turn up to the meetings and that you can actually progress. That's what we'll be doing over the next little while, to see which are the things that we can actually progress and make a difference on.
Oh, I could get one question, could I see?
Sure, Peter. Thank you.
It's just around the skills and training and obviously unemployment's gone up and we've got a lot of rangatahi and they're coming through, and you're saying there's skill shortages. We've got RSCs coming in to fill some of those gaps. So, just solutions, to make those changes within the social environment for those rangatahi that are coming out of school. And is there any meaningful solutions that are going to be put forward
Yeah.
to reduce that?
Through you, Chair. So I'm in conversations at the moment with MSD, the Ministry of Social Development, the Polytech in particular, Tertiary Education Commission and others to look at what is actually working in that pathway at the moment. And I might be wrong on this, but from what I can understand, there's only ever been one proper evaluation of a, like, what are those programs like? The programs that take young unemployed people into the workplace. So there's a huge amount of activity going on around this, and there's contracts being delivered left, right and centre by different organisations, but there's very little understanding of what sticks. And when we talk to industry, they would say things like, we've tried everything, the meat process, we've tried everything. We give free sausage sizzles and we transport people to work, but that's not systemic change and it's not making a difference. There's some really good work that's been done up in Auckland that we are looking at the moment and thinking about how could we replicate that in Hawke's Bay. So these are the things. I think if you look at the spectrum across skills, you've kind of got, you got back to the high school space, then there's the not unemployed, like young people not employed in education and training, what's being done around that space, and then there's the actual work readiness stuff, and then there's do we have the right qualifications and training within the region, full stop. And that, by the way, it would take far too long, but from what I can understand, how the information is even gathered to inform the tertiary education's funding of training and courses is really poor and really, really disconnected. And everyone acknowledges it, but there's no, I think there's a space for us to help develop a mechanism to better understand industry and training. So I think right across that pathway, or that whole employment experience, there's going to be, we need to break it down into those particular areas where we can make a little difference, whether that's in connecting the right people, doing the right types of evaluations to show that a lot of the money that is being put into this stuff is not working, or the ones that are working, that we can improve it. But at the moment, there's just a lack of information all over, and there's definitely a lack of people sitting in the same room together talking about these problems. So that's kind of where I'm thinking that we'll start on the skills and talent space, is actually getting the right people in the room together and nutting through not only what are our problems, but let's start testing out some initiatives that actually might make a difference and then evaluate them as we go. It's no quick fix. Sorry, that wasn't a very succinct answer, but we're just trying to work through it.
Thank you. Sorry, Laura, I think we're going to have to move on. We're just running out of time. So, Lucy, thank you.
Offline, Lucy.
Okay.
Look, for me, the conversation around productivity is a really interesting one. On one level, if we just scraped all our wonderful soils off and sent all our RSE workers home and just mined our gravel, our GDP per capita might go up. So I think the point of making that is that there are systemic, structural reasons why we have a low GDP per capita, and I think so more insight on that and well, what is the fix?
That's right. Because we're just kicking the can down the road all the time.
But some of it comes with the territory of being a primary producing region, I think. Anyway, look, can I have a mover and seconder to receive the paper? So Martin to and move, and Jock to second. All those in favour?
We're going to speak to the...
I would prefer, unless it's really something really urgent, that we move on.
We do have a workshop on it.
We do.
Yeah, we do.
We do. We've got plenty of time later on. Thank you.
So we're not having comment?
No, we're not. No.
It's an unusual turn of events, Mitch.
We haven't got time. You had a pretty good crack last time, so I'm happy to put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. No. Against? Okay. I'll record Neil Curtin as no. Thank you.
In standing orders. They'll be suspended standing orders.
We're moving on. Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, we are. I'm conscious we've got a high-powered team from HBRIC here, so we'll move right on to them and leave organisational performance until last.
Hey, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou. We're pleased to be here to present the quarterly report from HBRIC, and we're also pleased to have some special guests today who are from our fund management group, who are our key partners to our strategy at HBRIC and at the Council on Investment. And so we can, I suggest we take the report as read, and we could have time for any questions on that towards the end, but we should use our time today to hear from our special guests, and I'll get Tom to do the introductions.
Tom? Okay. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Thanks, Dan. So, look, just happy to introduce a familiar face in Sam Howard, who's with Jarden here locally and has a long association with Council, and a new face, Chris DeLeva, who is from Harbour Asset Management. And so just, I think, in terms of the approach recommended by Dan, probably the best quick segue into their presentation is probably an item that's in the paper, which has talked about the discussions we've had with HBRC and bringing forward a sort of a dividend payment, a cash payment that feeds into our annual sort of cash delivery expectations for the organisation. And I think there's 2 points to note around that. I think one is that is kind of the benefit of taking a group view, which is part of the mandate that this council has given to HBRIC as part of the changes. So I think that's an example of one of the benefits, and I think one of the reasons we're in a position to do that was another decision of council in terms of its sort of strategic investment review was to, open up the SIPO and, the investment mandate to new growth and give HBRIC, the opportunity to RFP and review, who is providing, providing some of your investment fund management services. So I think it's kind of, potentially on that sort of, that happy note that it's nice to introduce the people who are obviously managing a significant amount of council's investment portfolio, and so without further ado, they'll give us a quick summary of who they are and how we've gone, and I suppose the question we always want to answer most, where to from here. So I'm not sure who's going to lead off, but I'll hand over to Sam and Chris, and Tracy's going to try and get their presentation up on the screen. Brilliant.
Kia ora tātou, thanks for having us. Yes, Tom, we have had a sort of a longish relationship now. It sort of goes back to sort of the later part of 2018, and through that period, a reasonably interesting set of events that have tested a group of councillors to sort of hold the course, COVID and all sorts of other things that have sort of come in between, and it doesn't get any easier now with the amount of noise coming out of sort of the geopolitical world. So we would encourage you to continue that sort of long-term view. The relationship has evolved from the first RFP that came about. The second RFP coincided with some changes within our organisation, which have allowed us to broaden the offering that we can present to council, and that also allows us to engage with a number of council staff on some different things, and that's I think that's been a positive move forward. We do go by the name of First Cape, and First Cape is a group of companies with different resources that we're sort of bringing to bear in the relationship. But ultimately, it's a group of people who have different skill sets, and those are being moved out through council. We do have a strong Hawke's Bay influence. Our CEO lives in Hawke's Bay. Our First Cape board is meeting in Hawke's Bay at the moment, and the team in Hawke's Bay that support Harbour with the portfolio, care deeply about the place. So we think that's a nice thread to have. But Chris is here from Wellington, ultimately responsible for the investment portfolio. And so I'll pass on to Chris to take you through that.
Fantastic, thanks Sam. So look, what I'd really like to provide today is a really strong overview of who Harbour is and how your portfolio's invested. Also how it's performed and give you some forward-looking statements on what our expectations are for the portfolio. So just kicking off on the first slide, it's interesting because when we talk to a lot of people, Harbour's not a name that rolls off the tongue quickly, and that's largely because we're largely a wholesale and institutional fund manager. We manage $19 billion on behalf of our investors. Our investors range from one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world to government-led funds to councils, about a dozen iwi and lands trusts, very much in the business-to-business space. My team also has responsibility for the BNZ schemes, which is $8 billion across BNZ KiwiSaver and Private Bank. We were founded in 2009 with two key clients. One of them is a government-led superannuation fund, the other a large global consultant. And today they're still clients of ours, 16 years on, and we have around 200 other wholesale clients who we manage money for. Just on the next page, Sam's given a really good overview of First Cape. Harbour Asset Management is the asset management division of that business. Just on the next page, look, I really want to give you an overview of our team because putting together a portfolio when you're an institutional fund manager isn't down to one person or one team. So the team in the middle is the team that I lead. We touch about 12 billion of the 19 billion that Harbour manages overall. Within our team, we've got a lot of experience. We've got Tony, who was the head of investments at Tower. We have Lewis, who had over a decade with BlackRock and Aon Hewitt in London. And my team's responsibility really is for the overall strategy and where we allocate assets. But you have a sector specialist structure which utilises the skills of a number of different Harbour teams. So, for example, you'll see later on you have a portion of your portfolio invested in Australasian equities. That's managed by the team across the top of that page, led by Andrew Baskand, our co-CEO and CIO. And across the top of that page, I look at three of the members who've got each 40 years of experience each, despite insisting that they're still in their 50s, which doesn't quite compute. On the bottom of the page, we've got our New Zealand fixed income and cash team. These are people who really are trying to add value by buying corporate bonds and New Zealand sovereign bonds relative to your benchmark. One of their key jobs is to decide whether we take on more interest rate risk or less interest rate risk. So, for example, today at 2 p.m, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand meets. They're the team within our business that really focuses on those announcements. We also get currency strategy advice out of that team as well. Just moving on and just providing just a little bit more colour. Just if we can skip to the ESG slide. Yeah, so look, responsible investment is important to us. It's important to a number of our clients as well. As I mentioned earlier, we manage money for other council, iwi, and actually our own BNZ KiwiSaver scheme, where really we have to offer products that are invested in a way that is responsible and As a fund manager that offers pooled funds, that's actually harder than you'd think, because responsible investing, actually we have to make a lot of values judgments, and the thing with pooled funds is we will never reflect everyone's values perfectly. While the industry focuses a lot on what to exclude, and that's important in some sectors, so for example, throughout your portfolio we don't invest in tobacco. We don't think it's particularly good investment, and fundamentally we try and avoid products which are harmful to their customers, because we don't think that is long-term sustainable. We take a similar view, for example, with gambling. So even if you were to say you can invest in gambling, if that was allowable within a mandate, we'd be very unlikely to actually buy a gambling company, because we think there's better places that we can put capital that can generate better growth. We also think actually a great way to invest responsibly is by what you do in a positive sense, because what we've found through time, and our Australasian equities team, for example, has worked together for over 24 years, what we've found in that time is that often companies that actually have a mission to generate a positive social outcome, that can often lead to good revenue. A really good example is a company that was actually taken over last year, which we're an early backer of, was Volpara Health. They do the breast density scanning, which has the positive impact of far better breast cancer diagnosis. And at the same time, that's good business too, right? Because they're upping the level of technology, which leads them to getting more customers. So positive outcome from a social perspective, health perspective, and a positive impact in terms of return. So we really do think of it from an exclusion standpoint, but also a value judgment standpoint. And within your portfolio, because we are an investor of good size, where we utilise global partners, and we'll talk about some of them later, they abide by the exclusions policies that we set, and those are applied across your entire investment portfolio. Look, just to move on, so we want to have plenty of time for questions. If we could just touch on the way the portfolio is invested. I mentioned earlier you have a sector specialist structure just on the next page. And look, our philosophy in building investment portfolios is to focus on where we have skills and complement those skills with skills of others. So, for example, 45% of your portfolio is invested in global equities. Now, we've taken the view that we have a strong track record in Australasia, equities and bonds, at building portfolios, but quite frankly, beating the global stock universe from New Zealand, we think that's a pretty hard thing to do, particularly when we take into account our global partners like T. Rowe Price have 200 analysts across 12 cities around the world, aiming to pick stocks that outperform the benchmark. We don't think that can be done in New Zealand, and we think the empirical evidence backs that up as well. So part of your portfolio, the global equities, we utilise these partners like T. Rowe Price and Epoch. Similarly with global bonds, we utilise a company called PIMCO. Harbour clients have around $2.2 billion invested with PIMCO. That is invested in a manner, again, where we set the risk and return parameters for that portfolio. Just at a really high level, the bonds in your portfolio, because they're there to play a defensive part in your portfolio, we focus on investment grade bonds. So high yield bonds, private credit don't form part of your portfolio. It's really there for the defensive, the defensiveness of it. Your global equities, and this is a strategy change from when you, from the portfolio you had previously. We had 50% in growth assets overall. Your global equities then were 50% hedged. Now, we believe that to create more resilience within your overall portfolio, having exposure to currencies other than the New Zealand dollar is actually really beneficial for a council to have. We don't want your portfolio struggling at the same time as your ratepayers are, and perhaps some of your more domestic assets are. So within your portfolio, we don't hedge that foreign currency. And look, we'd love to say, you know, we knew it was coming. It was the perfect time to do it when we changed over to your new strategy, but that has been a very big positive for performance. A lot of the foreign currency exposure is to US dollars. You know, for any of you looking to book a holiday in the US, you'll probably find that your New Zealand dollar is not getting you very far at the moment. The New Zealand dollar touched 55 cents versus the US, trading at 57 now. That's near the lows that we saw in COVID. We do have the discretion, if we believe that the New Zealand dollar is severely under or overvalued, to adjust your hedging. And actually, when the New Zealand dollar touched 55 versus the US, we added some hedging within your portfolio. But your default strategy within your portfolio, which I think is the right one, is to have unhedged foreign currency for your global equities. There's $183.4 million invested, as you can see in the bottom of your screen. That is split between the council portfolio and HBRIC. Just moving on, let's touch on just some of the characteristics. I've touched on some of these, but look, we see a key part in talking with HBRIC of our part of the overall portfolio is to have a portfolio that can actually provide liquidity quite easily. So in times when we get, you know, for example, the early dividend, it's very easy for us to liquidate assets down and pay that to you. So we don't have any illiquidity in the portfolio, because elsewhere in your portfolio you have a high degree of illiquid assets. You can see the asset diversification. It is a very well diversified portfolio, and I touched on the foreign currencies just earlier, providing your portfolio with a bit more resilience. Just switching to performance. So, look, just to give you a bit of an overview of the transition beforehand, all went really smoothly. What we try and do during a transition is to, we work with the team at HBRIC and with Tracy, just to ensure that we maintained market exposure the whole way through. So we're not going and selling down your portfolio with your existing providers, having that money out of market and then reinvesting it. We're doing things like in-specieing shares over, which maintains your market exposure throughout, and we got to your 70% growth allocation fairly quickly. And look, touching on performance, we've got it here to December 2024 and also to January. The story's pretty similar for both, so if we just go through to January on the next slide. Look, we've got two numbers here, and essentially, so one is how the portfolio returned, one is how the benchmark index performed. Your key barometer for whether Harbour is doing a good job with your portfolio is you would expect that number, which is currently behind the benchmark over the short period of time, to be ahead. And you'd expect it to be ahead over rolling 3-year periods, because as we know in markets, we're investing actively, there can be times where the market can over or undershoot, but we expect over a rolling 3-year period that largely irons itself out. By moving to a higher amount of growth assets, you know, this has undoubtedly added a strong return aspect to your portfolio. We put that number at around an additional 2% that you've generated by having the higher amount in growth assets. We've had a bit of underperformance over the past few months. That's just mostly down to our global managers who have underperformed, having less in the US during a period where 7 stocks have been pretty rampant in the returns that they've provided, and our managers tend to be more diversified across different geographies. Looking forward, we like to be honest and sober in our assessments, because you're probably looking at that short period of time and going, wow, that's magnificent. I'll have that every kind of 5 or 6 month period. When we look at markets at the moment, we think the backward-looking returns of shares are higher than you'll get in the future, but we actually think the backward-looking returns for bonds, which are still 30% of your portfolio, are far lower than what you'll actually get in the future. So at the moment, within your global bonds portfolio, we're getting fixed income coupons, so a yield of 5.8% currently. And these are for bonds with an average maturity of about 6 years. So really strong return from an asset that we see as relatively low risk. Within equities, valuations are high, particularly in the US. And the US is a really important market because it makes up around 65% of the global share universe. So that's why you will most commonly hear the S&P 500 as the main index that you'd hear about when people talk about investment markets. The US market really is quite expensive at the moment, and that typically hasn't boded well for long-term returns. If we just flick through, and we might just go forward to page 17. The good news is that actually the rest of the world looks pretty good on a valuation basis, including New Zealand. And sorry, the whiskers haven't appeared. Can you click one more to see if the boxes come up? Oh, no, that's fine. I knew that chart was far too complicated when we put it together, and it hasn't come through. But that's okay. What it's showing you is for most regions outside of the US, valuations are pretty close to long-term averages. And we use the median for New Zealand, and the key reason we use the median is because we have a really, really large company called Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, which makes up, at any one time, call it 15 to 20% of our index. So given we're selecting stocks across New Zealand, we tend to look at the median stock as a good representation of the opportunity set in New Zealand, and New Zealand shares look pretty fairly valued. Within your portfolio, we actually, on a go-forward basis, quite like New Zealand shares. So New Zealand shares have been probably one of the more horrible performing share markets globally over the past 4 years. And people tend to have really short memories. So, often now, when I get asked about different share markets, people go, oh, New Zealand's dreadful. It was the best performing share market globally for 2 decades, from the year 2000 to 2020. In the US market, which is a market that everybody loves at the moment, from the year 2000 to 2010, that was one of the worst performing global share markets. Actually delivered nothing to investors, because in that time they had the tech bubble, of course, which a lot of US tech names were involved in, and the global financial crisis, where they were hit harder than others. So, look, we take a really long-term view with portfolios. We like to keep diversified. We don't like to chase trends or fads and try and upweight the US, because the US has been the best backward-looking sector. I thought I'd touch on page 19, because another question we get asked about New Zealand is that the economy doesn't look great. And I was fortunate enough to sit through some of the last session where we can see that in so many measures New Zealand does lag some other countries. But we think cuts to the OCR work. They've typically worked pretty well in the past, and we're just starting to see some of the OCR rate cuts filter through to real people in the real economy. Because something we've seen in New Zealand over the past 2 years is households have just been completely stretched by this increase in interest rates, and they're rolling onto those higher interest rates, and it's really impacted their consumption. We've started to see mortgage rates come down, which will be ultimately good for the New Zealand consumer. Westpac came out with a 4.99 the other day. You know, I bet you when interest rates were hitting 8%, you weren't thinking that we'd see a 4.99 for 3 years quite so soon. So that does provide stimulus, right? The less money that you're paying to the bank, the more money you've got to hopefully consume on other things. And this ultimately will also be good for New Zealand fixed income investments, because we expect actually the OCR might be cut by a little bit more than the market expects, which I was saying to myself before this meeting not to say that, given the Reserve Bank meets at 2 p.m. today and might make a fool of that statement. But look, that is what we expect within portfolios. The other thing just to draw out is, and this is my final point before opening up to questions, is that we went through a period in markets where it was really hard to diversify. So if you look back to, and what I mean by that is in 2020, it was really hard to diversify your portfolio because bond yields got so low that they couldn't offer you much protection should something happen in a share market drawdown. And we saw that in 2022, didn't we? Where we saw equity markets go poorly, inflation come up, so rates had to go up, so you had negative returns from bonds and from equities. Something that provides us some comfort within our investor portfolios currently is that actually if we did have a growth shock, which might not be good for equities, we do have bonds there delivering a really strong yield, and there's lots of room for central banks to cut and respond and push those automatic stabilisers into our economy, and that would result in some offset from bond returns. So bonds, still a really good diversifier to have in portfolios, but as we know, they insure you for a growth shock, not an inflation shock, as we saw in 2022. Key views in your portfolio, we've got a little bit more currency hedging within your portfolio. So we're sitting at about 10% currency hedging of your global shares versus a 0% benchmark. Although US markets are very fully valued, fortunately within your portfolio we've kept your overall growth asset allocation at benchmark, so you've really fully participated in these up markets. But we are starting to see a few signs out of the US that might, in the next time we meet, see that that allocation to shares goes down. And specifically what I'm talking about there is a lot of the large companies in the US are committing a lot of capital expenditure towards trying to advance their prospects within artificial intelligence. So for example, we saw Meta, a company that makes about $130 billion of cash flow from operations, say that they will spend $75 billion of that, plough that into capital expenditure. Ultimately, we don't know whether that will deliver a return on investment. The CEOs of the companies aren't really sure whether that will deliver an appropriate return on investment. So we just see that as a risk that through time we could perhaps protect your portfolio from and put it in assets where we've got a higher degree of earnings certainty. So might just stop there for any questions that you might have.
Questions, team? So McIntosh.
Probably not so much a question, Chair. Just wanted to note our brilliant foresight in changing our strategy just in advance of a surge in global share markets. And but of particular note, did I hear that right? So you think that the period that we're talking about, that change in strategy resulted in and I know this is a double-edged question, that change in strategy resulted in 2% additional gain as compared to our previous strategy?
Yeah, and with that, the way I calculate that, because I don't there's lots of if, buts and maybes whether, Sam and the Jardine team would have changed the allocation within the portfolio. So what I've simply done there is saying if we invested in the benchmark at 50% growth assets versus 70% growth assets, what's the difference in return?
Okay.
And it's 2%. So that's the best number I can give, but I think I've calculated it in quite a genuine way. But as I say, we're not claiming anything for that. It's a very short period of time, shorter than any time frame where we feel like we've got any control over. But it's something to note because we live in a world where changes have consequences, and that's been a positive one so far. Yeah.
Look, and can we also just, and I get all that, it just shows you, Chair, what is potentially available to us, albeit it is a double-edged sword. So we're talking about 180 of a $500 million total investment. So it shows you the potential we've got there. And this is a good example of making some changes and yielding a good result, albeit it's lumpy, but longer term it's good.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, Tom, there's a section in the paper which we need to move on and receive a note on council's cash expectations and this process. So we're now in the much more pleasant situation of having realised some gains and having more gains both unrealised and realised that put HBRIC in a better position to deliver on council's expectations, but also have some flexibility. It'd be good to just walk us through that, and just so that councillors are clear on the process, but now to where we embed potentially the income resilience reserve. So what does that look like over the next few months, please, in terms of process?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So I suppose just zooming back out, as part of the broader set of changes that this council sort of initiated and ultimately made around return expectations and where investments could be and kind of group investment focus. One of those was a request for the group investment portfolio to deliver a $12.5 million cash return that sort of went back into operations. Then I think through the annual plan process, $2.55 million was added to that as part of that process. So what we're sort of I suppose presenting or summarising today is that as a result of a good port performance and some of those changes that you made to the investment mandate flowing through to the managed funds, is that we've managed to pay about 81% of that revised cash payment through, and that's not just HBRIC, that's the group. Keep on sort of coming back to the importance of the group perspective, and based on our expectations for port dividend, the first tranche of port dividend going forward, just based on what they've suggested to the market, is that our expectation is that we will be able to meet that full dividend, so quite comfortably. So that's good news. I suppose we can also begin to start extrapolating into the future and thinking about, well, how's the portfolio going to perform in the second half? And I try and put the disclaimer in the paper is that just because we've had a good first half doesn't guarantee a good second half. But what HBRIC will be doing alongside the HBRC team is trying to get early into an understanding of what the full year position is, because council has also requested that we establish and fund an income resilience fund loosely, that equates over time, that we build it over time so it represents 1 year's dividend of the port, just so that we can have, continuity in case there's adverse events. And so what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and get you those projections as soon as we can, so that they are informing your decision making as you go into the next financial year. Is that the?
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Tom. Right, well, if there are no other questions, then we can just move on to receiving the paper, receive it now. And we're going to have a little break for morning tea if we can get past this, according to the boss here. So can I have a mover to receive and note the paper. Thank you, Joel. And I think Martin is second. Want to speak to those motions? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. That was an enlightening presentation, Chris and
Thank you.
Tom. Sorry, Tom. And
Yeah, very.
I want to ask you what the OCR cut was going to be.
So 20 minutes?
So, well, we've still got organisational performance reports, so.
We could grab our cup of tea and come back.
Yeah, look, 10 minutes now. Yep, and then we'll come back and do the organisational performance report. Thank you. Organisational performance report, the home stretch.
Home stretch.
We're lucky last.
Take it away, Sarah.
Happy staff.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sarah Bell toko
Team,
ingoa.
come on.
I'll tell you what, Aaron.
Ding the cup, ding the cup.
Hey guys.
Like a wedding. Kia ora koutou, ko Sarah Bell toko ingoa. I'd actually, before I get into it, just want to introduce my colleague who joined the team in January. Her name is Tao Wen. So she's our corporate planning analyst. So she's really instrumental in helping this quarterly report. She sort of started as we were starting it, so she's seen it through to the first quarter as well. So just say, introduce Tao.
Welcome.
Oh, you have been in HBRC for a while, so you're not new to the organisation, but she's new to our team. I just before I go through the paper, I just wanted a bit of a reminder about why we do the report. So we've been doing it for about 6 years now, and it is a performance snapshot that we actually do every 3 months. So we don't wait for the annual report to do this, and we present it at this meeting, but it is publicly available, and as it goes up onto our website, it's available for the public, which helps towards our accountability and transparency to the work that we do at HBRC. And we very deliberately present the report in a designed format, because rather than a formal paper, which I know a lot of other councils do, because it makes it visually easier to read and digest. So we're thinking of our communities when we do this, as well as yourselves. And also our added part of it is that we highlight a lot of what the corporate service metrics are in this report, because that often gets missed out of the annual report, where we're focusing on our activities and levels of service measures. So it also provides insight to all the work that goes on behind the scenes that support our activities. So it just fills that gap as well. But other than that, so this report is for the period 1st of October to 31st of December 2024. It has all the usual information in it, which is our executive summary, which includes the highlights and challenges, a big focus on our corporate metrics, our levels of service measures by exception, so we're only reporting those that are off track. Everything else that's not in there, we've deemed it on track. It does go to our executive leadership team for review and for questions as well. And then plus we have our activity reporting, which includes some financial reporting, which is different from the report that you had this morning, because it's by GOA. And if there's any curly questions, I will refer to my colleague Chris, because I won't be able to answer them. So yes, and so apart from that, I take the report as read, and I'm happy to help with any questions, but I may call on my colleagues to come up and answer any specific ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll go straight into questions. Councillor Sears has been very quiet today.
Have I? Well, maybe there's been a lot of other voices today.
Yeah, true.
I'm just interested in the Lagoimas. Were delayed just by approval by group managers. It reads as though that's just group managers have taken their time, but is that about getting more information? Or my point, Sarah, is Lagoimas are a really important piece for our community about getting information in a timely manner. It gives them confidence that that can be done. So the way it's written there, it makes it look like group managers sort of just didn't get round to approving it. Actually, what you mean there is that it was complex information that was required from group managers?
Yeah, I think Susie's probably the best person to answer that question.
What we've seen in terms of the number of Lagoimas, they've definitely increased since the cyclone, but what we're also finding is there's some quite complex Lagoimas coming through that do bear a significant legal risk for this entity. A lot of the Lagoimas, or a large number of Lagoimas at the moment, are so large in their inquiry. They could be from lawyers, more recent, just sort of investigative type stuff, which we have to respond to. And so we are having to use all of our tools and techniques to deep dive all the information required to support that. In some instances, we're issuing Lagoimas in tranches because the information expectation is so large. And where we need to, we are having to engage our external counsel or internal counsel to just have oversight of the information that is leaving, both from a privacy, from a confidentiality, from a all of the above. So quite complex area at the moment to manoeuvre.
To deal with. Can I ask a few more, Chair, just on this subject?
Yep.
Just quickly, budget, obviously, if they're getting so complicated, there could be some budget implications, which I haven't seen mentioned.
We're using internal resource at the moment to produce those, pinching and pulling all of the same resources that have helped on other reviews. So at the moment, it's not costing us extra, but we are burdening our staff with other, putting it on top of other people's roles. Yeah.
Last question. In other councils, the Lagoima requests come every month because it's all public information with the names, the people and the requests. We don't do that here, and I'm wondering why not, and if, Chair, that could be something we could consider adding.
Short response. I'm happy to take that up. Yep.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
I think, Chair, we did at one stage get reports without the names, but the nature of the entity, just for privacy reasons, the nature of the entity, the nature of the request was a table or something.
Most councils do list with the names, so I don't think there's any issue around privacy. Lagoima's are public requests.
Did Lagoima, who'd Lagoima do, I suppose, could you?
Correct.
Yeah.
Through you, Chair, actually, there is a problem with releasing their names in public because we've had previous instructions from the Ombudsman that is not acceptable if it's private individuals. If it's a business, that's a different thing. So if we do report them, we'd always take out individuals' names.
So other councils are doing that against advice. Okay, thank you. Good clarification.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I've got two questions, Chair. One to pick up. Have we explored Minister Collins' idea of employing AI to help us with Lagoima requests in terms of mining the initial information, categorising it as potentially one of the Section 7 things, and then we coming over the top for the final audit? Has that been explored?
In order to respond to those complex Lagoimas right now, we are using data mining techniques through the technology team to identify certainly where there's emails or any messages, any papers, etc., meetings, agendas. So we do use a form of data mining. We don't use AI as such yet. That's not an embedded tool and technique as yet in this organisation, but certainly data mining in a manual sense.
Perhaps something to take up with LGNZ to get some sort of platform. Chair, the other question I had was drain infrastructure maintenance, one for Chris probably. It's off track but not significantly off track. There are drain excavations that are still required, bracket with budget constraints, and a comprehensive inspection will give a clear understanding of the current state. A lot of, obviously, community anxiety. Does that mean that we're not doing these drain excavations because we haven't got the money? Or does it mean we're going to do what we can within the money we've got? What do the brackets mean with budget constraints?
So a bit of everything. So we are constrained by budget. We have fixed operational budgets and we can't just unilaterally decide to exceed those budgets. So there are some papers coming up on a number of matters. One is some major drain, post-cyclone drainage work that needs funding. We also know that we still have mobilised silt within our environment, and so there's a lot of redigging drains and culverts, but we're working hard to do all of that work. There are some papers, I think, coming in March and April around budget position and also funding, particularly where insurance may only cover part of the work around further borrowing to fund that work. So it's coming, and it is a real challenge that we have. Effectively in asset management across most of our schemes, we are hitting budget ceilings because of a lot of that rework and rats and mice and expectations of the community.
Thank you, Chair. Look forward to the paper.
Councillor McIntosh, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Vandalism of that camera at Pogitap and the alternative we put in place, does the alternative compromise our ability to monitor floods?
So that's from the environmental information team, so
Yeah,
I'm
that
not
is,
familiar
yeah.
with the, but precisely, right? So we put these cameras out as tools for ourselves and the communities. They often put in the optimal location. And so sadly, vandalism, works against us in terms of providing those services. So, look, I haven't got the specifics of where it's been located. Maybe Richard is aware, or maybe we just get back to you with a bit more detail.
It's beyond frustrating, really, but I was prompted by two things. One, actually, should we have another camera to be able to see who's doing the damage to them and hold them to account? And the second thing was, does the alternative compromise our ability to monitor flooding in that area?
Yeah, good question. Richard, welcome.
That's a good question.
Kia ora, Richard Wakelin, tōku ingoa. So your original question, so no, it doesn't actually compromise the data because the camera gives the visual of what's going on, so it was the additionality that it was actually providing. But the sensing information is still in place and provides the flow information and all of the technical data that's actually required. So the camera is providing a visual representation of what is actually happening, but the data is still collected. So it's not compromising the data.
Okay. One more question, Chair.
Yep, sure.
On staff numbers, 314, which is pretty much the same as last year. In fact, though, have staff numbers gone down by my maths about 7%, taking into account that the current staff numbers include 23 staff for the project management office?
And just through you, Chair, further to that, we do have the 20 roles on hold. Is that that's an additional to those numbers?
They're not included in that
They're
number.
not included in
No,
that, so
yeah.
there's another 20 roles held unfilled.
These are bums on seats as well. I mean, it is worth pointing out that our employee count does include CEDM as well, because obviously we're administering authority. There's about 15 people in there as well. So, yeah.
The RRA.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Curtin in a second, but while we've got Richard at the table and we've just been talking about monitoring, ICM, I'm looking at page 23, ICM environmental information, and there's a comment there about staff vacancies impacting on timeliness and more concerningly the completeness of data sets. So I just wanted to check, are we in a situation where our state of environment monitoring is being compromised, our ability to have those continuous data sets?
Not at this very time. Obviously, there are some implications which I'm just currently reviewing at the moment to actually understand what the impact of those reductions. So the direct implication is less sites monitored. However, there's still the ability to meet our requirements with the sites that are being monitored, but it's certainly the compromising the timeliness because it doesn't allow any the maintenance of sites and things like that is actually now starting to have an impact on the ability to deliver on that.
Okay, thank you. Is that something, Chair of EICC, that we could learn more about? Because the concern being that bedrock of state of environment data, then the value, the long-term value of having those complete data sets is something that we should not jeopardise. And so if there's a problem, if there's a risk to that, we need to understand it.
Through you, Chair, we did have that conversation at budget time around the loss of those and the fact that we don't lose historic data and it can be picked back up in years to come. But we could unpick that a little bit more, Richard, perhaps at next committee meeting.
Through you, Chair, I think there's more work to be done on that because any gaps in the data actually impacts on the lifetime performance of that data as well.
Sure.
Thank you. Councillor Curtin.
Thank you. This is a question for Sarah. I'm sure she's got the answer for this. Page 17, levels of service measures, emergency management. the 10-year hazard research plan. I see we've got that on pause. Just can you tell us, the people doing that planning, I understand that a good number of them sit on the HBRC side of the equation. Is that your understanding?
Yes, it is. I think the two resignations they talked around were both in CEDAM. I don't know if Nick will know anymore. Yes, as our team leader for risk, I think, was one of the resignations, and the East Coast Lab was the other one. So that's, yeah.
So it's a CEDAM capacity issue as opposed to an HBRC capacity issue. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know much more than that, yeah.
Right, it's supplementary to that, Mr. Chair, just looking at the way we've structured this report, it's my view that the 10-year hazard research plan ought to be also on the HBRC emergency management list as well. It's my understanding of it, it's a strong collaboration between CEDAM and HBRC, probably more HBRC actual input than CEDAM, and whether we could consider next time around duplicating that into HBRC so we do get line of sight on it. And I wonder whether we could look at some sort of report back, perhaps to the next corporate strategic, about the planning process and where that's heading.
Sure, I can take that away.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Are there any more questions? There are none. Oh,
Sorry,
Councillor Ormsby.
Chair, thank you, through you. This may be a question for Nick. We have here on slide 28 an underspend in Hawke's Bay CEDAM Group due to vacant positions. Is there any update you can provide on positions that are going to market that are valuable for that team?
Yes, Chair. So First Move, we're currently advertised as the GM Group Controller role. So that's currently out in the market now, and we'll be interviewing for that later in March. And then as a result of the transformation strategy, then looking at all of the roles that sit underneath that.
Thank you.
Right. Oh, and one more from Councillor Sears.
If you don't mind, I just want to, the CEDAM issue. I mean, I think Sarah's answer to Neil's question raises the problem that we have, which is actually we don't really understand exactly where the responsibility sits or the resignations within the group or within HBRC. And it just raises again for me, probably back to you, Chief Executive, it's our problem, it's a shared problem, it's not, I'm not speaking against you, but it raises the problem again of the misunderstanding for me, and I think for the other councillors, which parts are our responsibility, which parts sit with the Joint Committee. We often ask questions and you'll make the recommendation that we write to the Joint Committee. If the Joint Committee has a problem with capacity, which is holding up the vital work, then I would say if that red relates to them, then we need to make a note through this committee that we need that addressed to the committee. If some of it's our responsibility in terms of staffing, I'd like to know which bit is so that we can give you some clear direction if we think there's a problem there, because I actually don't understand whose problem the red is or the yellow.
I'll try and assist. In terms of the hazard plan that is run out of CEDAM, we'll listen to Councillor Curtin's comments and we'll have a look at whether there is anything further we can report on from an HBRC perspective, but that's centrally a CEDAM role.
Right, so joint committee responsibility. Okay.
Yeah, and essentially through the coordinating executive group, we are responsible for staffing the group office, and first role part of that, and the KEG and the Joint Committee well aware of this process is the recruitment of the group manager. There's a transformation strategy in place. We're now working through that process. So there will be a number of roles to be recruited, and and this council made a provision for that at a recent council meeting. So that process is well underway. Happy to provide any of the papers that have gone to the joint committee if that assists.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I'm going to thank just the team for all their questions today. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder to receive and note organisational performance report. Councillor Williams to move.
Second.
Councillor Sears to second. Do you want to speak to those motions? No.
Chris can tell me later why they've stopped tree nourishment at West Shore.
Later. Only, Chair, only to comment that I agree with you, Sarah. I think the presentation's excellent, and I think the way the budget financials are shown are excellent too. It makes it really easy to talk to our community about where those budgets sit. So I think it looks fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favour of the motion? Aye. Against? Carried. And that brings us to the end. Apologies for being 10 minutes over. Peter, can I prevail upon you to give us a closing karakia or lead us in one?
Thanks. Me karakia koutou, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tātou reki a ihu karaiti, me te araha o te atua, me te whiwhi taitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amene.
Yeah.